Hello dear viewer, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a range of autumn crafts. The first one is making fabric pumpkins. You will need the supplies shown on screen. First you take your circle of fabric, gather round the outside of your circle, I personally stuff all of my pumpkins with fabric scraps, which I save throughout the year, but of course you can use an old pillow stuffing or new polyfill if the whim takes you to do so. I sew them nice and tight at the top. Give them a good squish to make sure they're nice and even. Next, I will go round with another layer of gathering stitches. You can see that there's little ridges. I skip sort of every other one. And I will then gather it down a little tighter. I find this gives the best results and helps with a more natural looking pumpkin. I then sew it a bit tighter, give it another squish, and on to making the stem. You can hot glue twigs to be stems, you can make fabric ones, you can do papier-mâché and then hot glue them on. Here I found a little tiny scrap of canvas that I'm using because it looks quite like a stem. Then just sew it on to cover up all of the areas that are gathered. Next I'm going to make a leaf. I find the best way to avoid the fabric from fraying is to just get a little bit of tape and then put the tape on the back of the fabric. Of course you could use iron-on interfacing, but I had tape at hand so that's what I used. Draw myself out a little pumpkin leaf. I like to colour it in, you don't have to. If you're gluing the leaf down, you aren't going to see the underside with the tape anyway. I often add a little bit of detailing. And then I will sew on my little leaf. And there we have it. The next craft I'm tackling is making a little pumpkin garland. I bought some pre-cut wooden shapes online and sketched out my designs with a pencil. I'm going for an early to mid 20th century pumpkin style, you know, like the little charming vintage illustrations. I just think they're really lovely. For this I chose to use acrylic marker pens. I find them a little bit easier than paintbrushes, have a bit more control, and I don't have to wash up a load of pots and brushes afterwards. I really enjoyed this. I had so much fun. I did do a couple of over the garden wall ones because who doesn't love a pop culture reference, and I think that they work really well with the more vintage style pumpkins that I'm going for in this garland. The next craft is making little fabric patches. You will need some scrap fabric, some scissors, a sewing machine or embroidery floss if you want to do this by hand. You will need to use the zigzag setting on your machine. I have a Singer Brilliance, so mine is setting number 3, but that will vary for every machine. But I find personally that I preferred to do stitch width of 1.5 and I went down to a 1 point distance, and I found that gave the best results for the appliques that I did. If you do have a zigzag stitch on your machine, you will have to just faff around and do a few little test bits till you find out what works best for you and your machine. It's important to make sure that you have a full bobbin and a full top thread before you start doing any embroidery, as there is nothing more annoying than your bobbin running out halfway through an embroidery stitch. I found that it was most effective to do a straight stitch around where I wanted to embroider, then to do a zigzag stitch over the top of that. I found that gave the cleanest results, but if you're working on the edge of a fabric to applique something to a different piece of fabric, you don't necessarily need to do this step. I am so happy with how these turned out. In hindsight, probably what I should have done is put them in an embroidery hoop, but I worked out that doing 2 layers of this fabric worked really well. May have gone slightly overboard with the number of appliques I did. I have cut out and ironed all my little applique leaf babies, elevator mushrooms. They have no right to be as good as they turned out, given how little thought I put into this. I'm actually well chuffed. I now need to go find things to sew them on too. So last time my denim jacket came through the wash, it came out with a battle scar. That's what happens when you have a jacket that's from the 80s.